Tripod, the official Trinity University Press podcast, invites authors, journalists, community leaders, and other guests to engage in exploratory, informative discussions on the subject of people, places, and the planet.
I'm Lily Brennan, and welcome back to another episode of Tripod, the official podcast of the Trinity University Press. Joining me today is Lance Garland, a Seattle firefighter, Navy veteran, nature adventurer, poet, and author of his upcoming debut memoir, Out There, to discuss his personal journeys, both physically and emotionally, that have helped him find his place in our crowded world. Welcome, Lance.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast.
Yeah, how does it feel to be the first virtual episode of Tripod?
I don't know. I'm excited to see how it turns out and listen to it myself. And I'm excited. So thanks for having me on as the first.
Yeah, I'm really glad we were able to do this. I know when we were emailing, I was like, "Oh, are you able to come into the office?" And you're like, "I'm actually in Seattle." I was like, "Okay."
I would have loved to come into the office. That would have been so much fun, but it is quite a distance.
I was debating turning the computer around so you could see the little studio, but maybe we'll save a tour for another time when you're able to make it. But outside of being the pioneer adventurer of the Tripod virtual domain, can you tell us a bit more about your background as a nature adventurer and firefighter?
Yeah, so I've been a firefighter for about 13 years now. I've been with Seattle for 11, and that's a paid firefighter job. But I was also a volunteer firefighter on an island near Seattle. And that was kind of my entry level. Sometimes it's like being an intern in different industries. You work for free to see, how to get in and get the job, and then also see if you like it. And I loved it. And I said, if I can work for free as a firefighter, then I can absolutely make it a career. So I've been doing that for 13 years now. And then as far as nature adventuring, that mostly started when I was in the Navy as an adult. So I didn't grow up doing a lot of adventuring, but I was always very obsessed with being outside. And I grew up in Washington State. Here, there's lots of natural scenery, and we would go to the beach and go explore, the local parks. And I think that started at an early age of me wanting to get further and further out there. So
I was like, I know my parents used to live in the Washington area, and they'd always talk about how beautiful that was, because I grew up completely in Illinois and the Midwest area, which, not to say that the Midwest isn't worth exploring, but it's definitely not the same as the beautiful mountainous lush area of Washington State. I haven't had the opportunity to visit myself, but I definitely should, I feel like, because I don't hike as much as I would like to, but I do love being outside. I think that spending time in the outdoors is so good for everybody, especially with this job. It's I love this job. I love getting to work on the podcast, but I am in front of a computer for multiple hours a day, or on my phone doing stuff for the social media. So when I was preparing for this, I was like, oh, I know I'm going to get FOMO about getting to do this stuff. Would you mind sharing a favorite location or adventure that you've gone on recently or in the past, just to kind of convey your experience as an adventurer?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when I was in the Navy and I went on my first backpacking trip with some friends, it was to North Cascades National Park, which is one of the least visited national parks in the US. And there's good reason, because there's a highway that goes through it, but there's not a lot of easily accessible trails. You have to get into the backcountry to really see it. And about a week and a half ago, I went out and I climbed Snowfield Peak, which is this incredible mountain that is covered in glaciers and crevasses everywhere. And it's just huge and expansive, but you can't even see it from the highway. So you have to kind of climb straight up 6,000 feet and then go on these ridge lines of these other mountains to finally get out into the backcountry. I just love getting off grid like that and getting to places that are really hard to get to. And the North Cascades is full of those peaks. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of peaks with glaciers up there. And I try to get up there at least once a year. I've been doing that for now about 17 years. So it's been a long time, and it rarely do something twice because there's so much up there to explore.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, now I really feel like I can't call myself like a hiker or anything like that. I haven't lived in Texas that long. I've only lived here for about 4, 5 years, and we're near the hill country area through San Antonio. So I've gotten the opportunity to go around to some of the national parks nearby. But like I said, I think this is going to give me like too much inspiration to like go out and do more trips, at least our parks and stuff that are around here. Although I might have to wait till it's not like 90 degrees out, which is
Yeah, the
usually
heat
here.
can really make it difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. In addition to just traveling in general, you're also a pretty experienced writer. I don't know if you would consider yourself a writer. Sometimes I interview people who have written books or are in journals and they still don't really consider themselves a writer. But I myself would definitely consider you a writer. And I was curious how you see writing fitting into your story, both as a Navy veteran, firefighter, kind of all those different hats. How does writing fit into your life?
Yeah, writing has been something I've done since I was a kid. It kind of came naturally to me, and I wanted to find a way to express myself. And I think that, especially like in the Navy, and in this book, there's some big challenges that I faced in the Navy. I was in a court martial as a witness, and I was up against Don't Ask, Don't Tell as an openly gay man. And so, with that chaos and that intense experience, I really needed a way to sift through it. And so, writing was my avenue of looking at what was happening to me and kind of giving myself perspective. Later, I would find out that that's actually a really common technique. It's a form of therapy called narrative therapy. And so that's kind of how writing became so integral to my life, is I was looking for a way to process things that were happening. And then, it shifted into fun. I'd go on these adventures and I'd go to these places like Snowfield Peak where, you just want to share that with people. So I'd write it down and I'd start describing it and try to like kind of preserve my memory of that situation. And so I got into adventure writing and started pitching these stories of these adventures to magazines. And then I got a lot of, feedback, and people started buying these pieces. And so it just sort of naturally grew from a hobby now to, I guess I would consider myself a writer because it's so much a part of my life. And now any adventure I go on, I look at it through that lens. Like, how can I share this with people who might not have access to this really difficult backcountry terrain? Like, I know that a lot of people do that through videos and photos, but for me, it's even more personal than that. And I've always just wanted to share that with people who were interested. So yeah, I guess I am a writer. I would consider myself a writer, and I
Yeah.
use it to connect with people,
As you should. Completely agree that you should call yourself a writer. Not that I have any say in the matter, but the reason I commented that was just I just graduated from college at Trinity University.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But I had the excellent opportunity to take one of my last classes was a adventure writing class. It was
Awesome.
The title was like topics in creative writing, but my teacher who was on my podcast recently, the is Kelly Gray Carlisle. She does a lot of nonfiction writing specifically. And part of the class was talking about what is an adventure? How would you define adventure? Because some books in the adventure category that you read are sometimes people's personal journey of cancer
Yeah.
survivors or people who have experienced really difficult traumas, but it's under the kind of guise of an adventure and a journey.
Wow.
And there's also, the like silly sort of I went to the grocery store and then like all of this happened on my way there. I guess I'm curious what your definition of adventure might be, or a journey, if you see a difference between those two.
That is a great question. I love that class idea. I would totally take that class.
It
I
was
think it's
great. It was
fun.
really great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what a great kind of finale to your degree. That's awesome.
Exactly.
How do I define adventure? I think I would just start with anything that's outside of my comfort zone. So, and that can happen as soon as you leave your house. I think it depends. You can sign up for a class that really challenges you. I think you could, meet somebody at a party or at an event, and then, their perspective challenges your worldview, and it starts an adventure of, you learning and growing.
Mhm.
So for me, so often I do align adventure with the outdoors. But I think also, yeah, in this memoir that I wrote, the Navy was an adventure, both physically being on a ship going around the Pacific Ocean, but also socially. I went on an adventure where I really learned what it meant to feel different and to feel oppressed, and also to feel supported as a different person in a community, so an adventure could mean so many different things. And I love the idea of people defining it for themselves,
Yeah, I think you would have really enjoyed the class as a part of a thing. Or would have been like an excellent guest to come speak about it. My teacher, who is obviously qualified for many reasons, but her most recent adventure was traveling to Europe and the Durham Cathedral there and lived in the cathedral for a year with her
Wow.
family and like went and like spent time with the clergy and got to be involved in all the day-to-day tasks and foundations of working in a cathedral. And that was her adventure. I think at the end of the class, I kind of came to the conclusion that like adventure is a perspective of
Yes.
anything can be an adventure if you choose to see it that way and feel that way about it, which I think aligns well with how you view it. Because I think very easily going through the experiences you detail in your memoir, others might see that not as an adventure, but more as like an obstacle or setback or
Yeah.
anything like that. But the choice to be like, this was my adventure, my journey is how you end up with a product like this. Part of me bringing that up was, and the bringing up the adventure writing class is when I was planning to interview and go through this podcast episode with you. I was trying to picture like who you were, like more about you and like how out there your memoir came to be. And I was reading some of your other work on Backpacker and Outside and Orion, and I was seeing you mention a lot of having moments of writing during your downtime, like kind of just in between activities and just deciding to recap what you had experienced or how you felt about it. And I was curious if that was partially connected to the origins of Out There, or if the memoir was just kind of something that you had planned to do and had dedicated like chunks of time to put together.
Yeah, this is all like really good questions, and I think defining adventure. It's funny when you were talking. It reminded me of this quote that I saw on a bumper sticker. I know it's so funny that you could get this
Love a
profound
bumper
moment
sticker quote. Yeah.
but it said the difference between ordeal and adventure is in attitude. And it's interesting because I do think that if I had viewed the challenges in my way, like the being in the Navy during Get On Us Don't Tell, or being the first openly gay fireman in Seattle Fire Department, if I viewed those as ordeals, I think it would have been so much harder. But viewing it as an adventure made it something that, it was an experience. It was something to be proud of. It was something to be, really present in. And yeah, so I think with this book, that so much of that has been the process of how do I interpret the things that have happened to me in my own way, instead of feeling like a victim of this oppressive, law.
Mm-hmm.
I instead started to feel more like an activist and trying to do something good for not only myself, but for the community and for the, future communities. I was writing these essays, and I didn't really have the plan of this book. This book sort of just started to piece itself together naturally. It was like, I was trying to process something. I was trying to understand my role in the world. I was trying to interpret my experience and kind of wring the best things out of it that I could. And then they started to all kind of line up and then turn into this, this book that is what Out There is now. It was not a plan per se, but it was evolution, I think. Yeah, it slowly came together, and I think I've been writing versions of this book and like pieces of this book for more than 10 years. I mean, you could even go back further than that. So
I hear that all the time with authors who write memoirs. The woman who taught my adventure class, Kelly Gray Carlisle, has also written a memoir, We Are All Shipwrecks, which
great title.
I was going to say, if you're looking for a memoir to read, I highly recommend. And because that's another example of like how one's attitude can completely change an experience from, as you said, an ordeal or an adventure. And we also had Carol Fulbray on the Tripod episodes. She just wrote a book, Wishbones and Wandering, which is another TU Press publication about traveling around Asia for just like, she was just like, okay, I'm going to do that.
Fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, and that was another thing where she was just kind of doodling and drawing during her time there, had no intention of putting it all together into one product, but that's how it ended up. And I think that results in really authentic writing because you're not doing it for any particular theme or genre. It's just kind of what comes to you? Because similarly, I feel like fiction authors do that all the time, of like people who are in the military or any profession just kind of throw their real life stories into fiction rather than
Yeah,
nonfiction.
absolutely. Absolutely.
I guess I'm going off on sort of a tangent about writing, but it might be a good idea to give somewhat of a summary of Out There for those who
Yeah,
haven't had the research opportunity that I had to look into the book and explore the concept. Do you want to just give like a short summary of Out There?
absolutely. Yeah, so I've kind of mentioned pieces of this, but I was in the Navy during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and that's when I came out. And that presented its own challenges. And then I got out, was a first generation college student, and then tried to become a firefighter. And then I was the first openly gay fireman in the Seattle Fire Department. And that presented a whole lot of different challenges, interpersonally, socially. And so for me, I needed a way to navigate and to work through these challenges in my way. And I found nature as the method of not only healing, but empowering myself to be able to get through and to, view the world and my life as an adventure instead of just, things in my way. And so that's what Out There is about. It's an inspiring tale, I think, that I'm trying to share the things that worked for me with the public and say, nature really helped me get where I needed to go. And maybe it can help you too.
I really like how structure, like getting to see the structure as you were explaining it, of, going through everything with the Navy and coming out while being a firefighter and all of that becoming the reason behind using nature as an outlet and getting out there, as well as like the entendre of like out and out there, I think is also so creative. You did already kind of touch on this answer to the question I'm going to ask, as what you would hope readers take away from the memoir, being that nature is an outlet that can help others. Is there other takeaways that you would want readers to have from Out There?
Trinity University Press is a mission-driven publisher committed to civic engagement with timely ideas facilitated by the publication of print and digital books, related media, creative and educational programs, and other activities that help us all better understand our place in a crowded world. For more than 50 years, Trinity University Press has published more than 225 titles and organized thousands of events, all focused on broadening our understanding of many impactful subjects, from human relationships with our physical environments to social equity and justice. For more information about Trinity University Press, visit tupress.org.
Absolutely. I think so many of us feel at times or often that we're different, that we don't belong, that people like us can't succeed. So many facets of being different. And I think for me, that could be a liability. But what I did was I learned that the more I trusted the universe, the more I trusted nature, the more I trusted my community, and I put myself out there, not to be cheesy, but like that was so empowering. And it actually was so much more rewarding than I could have ever imagined. And so I do want to help encourage people to be more their authentic selves and to try and to put themselves in positions where, those miracles can happen to them too. And so, yeah, that's what I hope that the readers get out of this, is an empowering, emboldening them to live richer, fuller lives and to not be held back by their fear or expectations or stereotypes, go define yourself on your own terms.
The question that comes to mind hearing you explain the messaging that you'd want readers to take away, I feel like I was going to ask who your ideal reader would be, but that just made me curious to think, like, what would your younger self think about Out There? Like, because to me, it sounds like maybe your younger self or younger readers would maybe be the ideal audience. I'm just curious what you think about that.
Some of the first pieces that I got published that are, tangential to this book were, I went out and I was looking for role models. Like I wanted to see what were the openly gay guys doing in nature. Were they climbing mountains? What were they doing? And I wanted to find inspiration myself. And, when I first started writing, there wasn't much out there. There wasn't a lot of representation. And so I just said, okay, if there's nothing out there, then something needs to be out there. Let me just put my story out there. And I was doing that in hopes, it's scary to do that, but I was doing that in hopes to find those people I wanted inspiration. I wanted role models. And, I ended up finding that. I found a huge community. There's so much representation now. It's a golden age of that.
Mhm.
But I think, yeah, like what you're mentioning is my younger self. I think I wrote this book in so many ways to give my younger self the thing that I didn't have,
Mhm.
and to help encourage our culture to share those stories because there are so many of us out there who are just looking for that inspiration, a little nudge, a little encouragement to say, you can do it too. And so, yeah, I mean, I hope the younger generation absolutely feels empowered by this story. And I think that, people older than me too, I was at my island's Pride event this weekend and I met a man who was 75 and he had just come out 5 years ago. And it was just amazing to see him coming into his own in his 70s. And he was just so happy and relieved to have crossed that threshold. And, I hope that that's something that this book does. And not just for, gay, lesbian, queer people, just for anybody who's struggling to live the life that they're dreaming of, that they don't feel like they can quite get to, because they can, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think oftentimes, I was going to say pieces of media maybe don't get enough credit in inspiring people to be out or make changes in their lives or take those steps later in life. But it does get a lot of credit. I think a lot of people I feel like there's the joking concept of this, of like, this was my gay awakening. Like when I saw this character,
Totally.
you know what I mean? So it's
Totally.
like, there's that concept of like
Yeah.
in media of something you see changes something about you. But I
Yeah.
think specifically with memoirs, that representation that you're talking about, where real people are sharing an experience, which takes guts, takes confidence to want to create that community. But you said after having published your work and written your stories that there is a big community out there.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about what that community is like and where you see your work fitting into that?
I think let's take the outdoor field as an example. I think that maybe 10 years ago, it was a pretty monoculture and there were not really people outside the box being presented as much. And I think there's a real big push to say that everyone is welcome in the outdoors. And I think that, I mean, this spans so many different demographics in our culture, whether it's race or body type, ability level, there's just so many. I have a good friend who only has one hand and she has to use a prosthetic. And she is such an inspiration to me because she's been out there telling her story and climbing these amazing mountains on her own terms, and not letting what other people might believe to be limitations get in her way. And there's also like a group local here that says that they call themselves unlikely hikers. Anybody can do this. At any skill, ability level, this is for you too. And I think that that's what is really exciting that I've discovered in the last 10 years is like people want to see people like themselves out there. They want that because they want to go out there themselves and they want to feel safe out there. They want to feel welcome. They want to feel like it's their place too. And I think ultimately that's the takeaway from this book for me is that, so often as a gay man, I was told that I was unnatural and not a welcome part of the world. And then I went out into the outdoors and I'm like, I am natural. People like me have been doing this for thousands of years. Why did I buy into the story that's not true?
Yeah.
And so that's what I think there's just an endless amount of people across our country who can relate to that, not feeling like it's supposed to be for them, but it is. And we're now telling those stories and it's beautiful. It's a renaissance in so many ways.
I would like to see Tripod fitting into that renaissance of like things. Our tagline is people, places, planet, because the whole point of me pitching this podcast to TU Press and working with TU Press to start it came out of a conversation of just like, we want a podcast. I came up sort of with the concept of we live in a growingly disconnected world. People are having a hard time not only grounding themselves with everything that's going on and taking the time to reflect and connect with their identity, but also people aren't as neighborly, as community oriented as we once were.
It's true.
And that has an impact on the world as a whole. So people, places, planet. And I was hoping by making this podcast and talking with people like you and other authors and all different kinds of people that someone could listen to this and feel like they have new ways to connect with themselves or connect with their community. Do you see out there and your work, your journey kind of fitting into those categories?
Absolutely. I think as far as people goes, being openly gay, for example, it's immediately like a social act because you have to come out to someone, and that could be somebody who's an ally, or it could be someone who doesn't accept you. And so immediately it's a people-oriented part of culture. And for me, I wanted to lean into that difference as a way to connect with people because our differences actually can connect us. I think we all feel, different and like outsiders at different times in life. And so, yeah, being very people focused and it's community driven, I think for me, that's how Out There fits into that. I want this book to start more conversations. Hopefully there's not going to be a lot more of the first openly gay man in this fire department, like you
Right.
break those boundaries, and then those conversations are easier to have. They're not so, the first time things. And then place is how you survive, I think, for me. Being very grounded and rooted in a place gives you purpose and belonging. I feel like so many of us want to belong. And the more that I have a relationship with place, the more like I mentioned, the North Cascades have given me so much in terms of, self-actualization and ability and empowerment. And that's defined and created because of my relationship to place. And I hope that other people who read this book can go out and find their place too. They'll feel more at home in that place, and then they'll feel more connected to the world. So planets, I think that goes back to the whole way of feeling natural. I was raised, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, of just being raised in a fundamentalist religion where I was told that being gay was not natural. And so I never felt that I belonged, or that I was a child of this planet, like, am I not welcome here? And then, over the book, I learn about people like me throughout centuries on this planet. And you end up feeling those roots and understanding that you have a part of this planet just like anybody else. And one of the main takeaways at the end of the book for me is that the more that you feel connected to this planet, the more you care about this planet, the more you want to preserve and be a good steward of this planet and not, contribute to its demise. Really, it's just a whole progression of you want to feel like a part of a community. You want to feel like you belong in a place. And then you want to give back to that planet. You want to take care of the thing that has taken care of you. So yeah, I think Out There has a huge part of your theme and your message. And I hope that we enforce that and uplift it for other people.
I can't think of a more perfect answer to like fit the tripod mantra. Really the only other question I have, because I mean I had, as you saw, that script of like pages of things, but I feel like we kind of covered a lot of it just through
Totally.
discussing things. But my other question is, are there any adventures you have planned coming up that you're excited about, or that maybe we'll have future pieces written about that readers can look forward to?
This summer, I'm going to do a high alpine traverse. So it's like a mountaineering multi-day backpacking trip with crampons and ice axes. And we're hoping to ascend multiple peaks along this high route. And it's something I've been dreaming of for a very long time. And I'm going to do it with a bunch of firefighters.
Cool.
And we're going to go out for possibly 5 nights. And then just hopefully the weather will be good for us, and we'll get to see that incredible area that I've never seen before. So
yeah, that sounds incredible. I think I hope something gets written about that at least. But that was my last question. So thank you so much for making this call happen and answering my long list of questions.
It's been fun. So thank you so much. I hope you keep doing it. And I look forward to seeing all your next guests.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be in touch and have great adventures soon.
Likewise. Get out there and do some fun stuff.
Will do. Thank you. Thank you for joining Lance and I for another episode of exploring people, places, and our planet with Tripod. Come back soon.